technology is a tool. It's a tool that should be used to aid the teaching and learning process. And if we look at technology as a tool, we then try to figure out how can we best use it versus banning it. Right now, there are a lot of places banning cell phones, banning this, banning that. I think the more we ban things from kids, that's the more kids are going to try to use it, right? So how do we bring that into the fold to say it's a tool, it's a resource? It's not a substitute for good teaching. It's not a substitute for good administration. It's not a substitute for good student behavior. It's a tool that can be used for all those things.
You're listening to the smartsocial.com podcast. I'm your host, Josh Oakes. This is our District Talk segment where we interview district leaders to learn how they're keeping students safe on social media so those students can someday shine online. Now, let's get back to the interview.
Hi, I'm Oliver Robinson, Superintendent of the Shenandoah Central School District. We're located in the Capital Region area of upstate New York, large suburban district of about 9,500 students. We have 13 schools, primarily on one large campus.
Fantastic. First question I have for you. How has the prevalence of technology in the classroom impacted student learning and engagement?
But in several ways. One, when you think about technology, we're talking about personalized learning. Certainly, it's a tool that provides students the opportunities to be creative, to engage in critical thinking, and so certainly drive to the student's interests. The second one is access to resources, information. And again, kids are able to be truly authors of their own learning by having technology, being able to access information, how they want to in times when they need to access information. And the third piece, I would say, collaboration with peers. More and more students are doing group work and collaborating not only with peers within classrooms, but peers within other school districts, in some cases, peers within other countries.
How can school districts deal with social media issues that may originate on a social media app, but then create a very real problem on campus?
I think the first thing when you think about social media is that, frankly, as adults, we have to learn more about the various apps that students are using. And once we understand them, I think that we could try to figure out then how do we want to help young people understand the potential pitfalls with certain social media apps, as well as how do we start to monitor some of those type things in terms of how they come into play within the school environment. We certainly see from a social emotional learning perspective that in many cases, students are isolating themselves in this very virtual world, which makes human interactions, much more challenging for some young people, which then lend to some increased mental health issues. We also recognize that there are certain situations where there's an overload of access to social media and an overload of access to information that's not necessarily true. So those are some of the issues that we have to contend with right away in terms of the potential negativity of it in social media. However, there are many good things when it comes to social media that we have to tap into, such as the fact that kids can better inform us of issues that might be happening within their lives or within their friends' lives, because it creates a platform for them to communicate information in ways that they don't have to even identify themselves at times.
Can you provide some examples of how your students may have used their social media in a positive or productive way that may have benefited themselves or their community?
I think one that stands out is the using social media in a crisis intervention situation where students are able to text. We have a phone number where you can text emergency situations. And so we know that kids access that and they share that information with each other in the social media environments with the various apps that they use. So that's one piece of it. We also see more and more that the kids are collaborating. For instance, our robotics team collaborating with teams across a team from China, for example, via social media about how they're building their robot and trying to be more competitive and trying to form alliances as robotic team members. And we also just a recent situation where a young person advocating for free lunch used social media to generate a huge campaign to get other students to sign on to her petition to the state. So in many ways, there's a lot of good ways it could be used. Again, we have to better understand it as adults so we could then guide our students in using it in very constructive ways.
In the age of one-to-one, how are you preparing students for positive technology use both in the classroom and at home?
Well, it's a multi-pronged approach. When you think about it, it's an education approach, it's a prevention approach, it's a monitoring approach, and then it's a responding approach. So when we think about it from an education perspective, we have courses around digital citizenship talk to kids about being good digital citizens. From a prevention approach, we certainly think about how do we filter certain apps or not filter certain apps within the school environment in terms of allowances. So prevention is a big part of that. And that prevention piece is also lent to the monitoring in terms of what sites are students using, how they're using those sites. And the last part of that is the response in situations where there's a violation of the code of conduct, for example, as a result of social media use. How do we respond to that in a very instructive way versus in a purely punitive way?
How have you been successful in increasing parent engagement to help keep students safe on social media?
I think in many ways, that's the biggest challenge, right? Because in many ways, some parents aren't even in tune with how their children are accessing social media. And so when we come into the equation, it's often unfortunate when something negative occurred that we engage with the parents to say, do you understand what your child is doing? Do you understand what your child is accessing? And so we try to approach the parent piece from a safety perspective in terms of giving parents resources, informing them about new social media sites based upon the lessons we're learning from our students ourselves. And so right now it's probably more in the standpoint from a safety perspective versus looking at social media, engaging parents from a useful or productive perspective. So we're trying to help parents, quite frankly, with you, protect their children because in many instances, kids are accessing sites at times where parents don't even realize they're accessing sites. And then when things flow over into our school environment, we try to bring the parents into the equation so they can be that primary monitoring of whatever is taking place, particularly outside of the school domain.
Yeah, I like that, bringing the parents in. Are there any stories that might come to mind about any social media incidents you've been able to get in front of or perhaps avoid by being proactive?
We've had a few situations recently where our school resource officer, who also follows various social media sites, and we have certain applications that there's certain buzzwords that students who are using our email system, for example, that they use certain words, triggers a certain risk. We look into follow up with certain communications. And so we've had some situations where kids have used words that may have indicated self harm. And so we're able to intervene right away to follow up with that child or follow up with that parent. We've also had situations where kids are posting potentially violent statements or pictures, and our school resource officer, we're then able to quite frank with you, go and knock on the door. And so we go from a virtual world to a very real world to say, do you understand what your child just posted? Or meeting with that young person, their parents are saying, do you understand what your post, what that's triggered in terms of now this thing has gone viral? We have had a few of those situations where because of social media, we were able to get ahead of issues before those issues showed up at school, be it after the weekend or otherwise.
What would your advice be to other educators and administrators to work together to create a culture of digital safety and responsibility in their schools?
I think that it starts with recognizing that technology is a tool. It's a tool that should be used to aid the teaching and learning process. And if we look at technology as a tool, we then try to figure out how can we best use it versus banning it. Right now, there are a lot of places banning cell phones, banning this, banning that. I think the more we ban things from kids, the more kids are going to try to use it, right? So how do we bring that into the fold to say it's a tool, it's a resource. It's not a substitute for good teaching. It's not a substitute for good administration. It's not a substitute for good student behavior. It's a tool that can be used for all those things or to enhance those things. So then we have to think about how do we integrate those into our plans? How do we make sure that we're truly maximizing the benefits of what technology brings to the table, which is largely fostering a greater sense of agency as learners and our students. And so they feel as if their voices are heard, that they feel empowered as learners because they are digital natives. And so we have to figure out how can we teach them in the ways that's natural to them from accessing information or quite frankly, from how they learn best. They learn best in this very virtual space. And so I think the struggles we have as administrators or adults is that sometimes we try to be too traditional in some of the approaches and not recognizing that we need to ask kids, how can we best use this tool to inspire you to be a better learner?
What are your 1 to 2 biggest social media concerns for the future?
When you think about it, it's truly about cyberbullying right now is the big piece of it, because as more and more platforms become more and more available, kids, the relationships or the dynamics of relationships are lost in a social media space. And so cyberbullying is one of those type things as we think about moving forward. And certainly as we get more into artificial intelligence, I'm not sure what that arena actually looks like into the future. but we have to handle it. We have to manage it, right? We have to figure out how do we bring that into the fold of how we do business as a school system. So that's the cyberbullying piece is an ongoing piece for us in terms of not creating these unsubstantiated issues that lend to panic or quite frank with you, a bullying situation that lends to increase in mental health issues with kids or fear factors for that matter. So those are the things that I think when we think about social media concerns moving forward is how do we have responsible social media use? It's not about banning social media. It's about how do we have responsible social media use.
Now, funding is difficult across the country. What advice would you give to other districts to secure funding to create the resources that parents need?
It's a partnership, right? And we saw that during COVID, where some parents had access to Wi-Fi at home, or some parents had access to computers. And so, how can we, as a system, try to supplement that piece in terms of what resources parents have? Because what we can't have is the lack of access becomes the next big source of inequity in terms of the learning experiences that kids are having. And so we try to bridge those things. How do we create those partnerships with families? One, first understand their needs, and then figure how can we support it through the avenues that we can, in fact, engage in those partnership with parents, which is the avenue through the child. So some cases, how do we provide hotspots to a young person so a young person can still have the same access at home that his or her peers may have in terms of using technology to complete assignments and things of that nature. And also the lobbying piece. As schools, we're trying to lobby our federal and state legislators in terms of ensuring that for instance, Wi-Fi access should be as common as turning on the lights or the water in your house. And so how do we use our voices as public institutions to drive some of those fundings into communities so we don't have those inequities or quite frankly, we have those the deserts where certain neighborhoods, certain individuals don't simply have access to it. It's unheard of in this day and age that access to technology is still an issue.
How is your school district approaching AI tools like ChatGPT?
The first thing that comes to mind and a topic that we often hear about is how do we monitor plagiarism? And so trying to collect resources for our teachers to understand AI and ChatGPT and those type programs are about and recognizing that they're a resource, they're a tool. So that's the first thing. The second piece is we have here in New York, Ed Law 2D, that again, certain requirements in terms of ensuring that privacy laws are being adhered to, that students are not accessing certain sites that may lend to their violation of privacy laws. So that's a big part of our conversations right now. And the last part also go back to our faculty and staff in terms of how do we try to provide them examples, best practices as to how this can in fact enhance their ability as teachers, such as developing quality lesson plans using AI. So it's a combination of ensuring that it's not being misused by students. And on the other side of it, ensuring that our faculty and staff are maximizing the potential that AI and software like ChatGPT brings to the table.
Now, are there any positive use cases that you've heard of from maybe students or especially teachers around AI tools like ChatGPT?
Absolutely. We already have teachers customizing lesson plans to align with different learning styles or to align with different language differences. So we see that quite happening, taking place. We see where now it's allowing for even more constructive feedback, particularly on certain writing assignments where the teacher articulate the criteria. And now the students can get much more detailed feedback on things and done in a much faster way where when you think about a typical English teacher with 100, 150 writing assignments, now that can be done in a way that is constructive to instructive to the student and also provides the teacher, quite frankly, more time to get those things done. So that's a big part of it as well. And we also see that it's a complementary tool to students where students can have 24/7 access to get a greater depth of understanding about certain concepts. So we're trying to figure out how can we systematize those things in the same way we systematize a new instruction material or a new textbook within our classrooms.
Now, with regards to ChatGPT, are you changing any of your techniques for grading students and the types of assignments being used in the classroom?
This is an ongoing discussion for us. We're not at a point yet to say this is what we're going to do, but it's certainly an ongoing discussion that we're looking at revising our academic integrity policy, particularly at the high school level, to ensure that we're using or incorporating AI in ways that's productive and doesn't necessarily constitute quote unquote cheating. We're looking at professional development for teachers so people understand what are we talking about because there's so many misunderstanding of what this is truly about and the potential implications of it. So a lot of professional development taking place with our teachers as we speak. So we're very much in that place of trying to understand it and try to figure out how does it impact existing policies and protocols, because this is a reality that we have to evolve as a school system to integrate.
Thanks for listening to our smartsocial.com podcast. I'm your host, Josh Oakes. This was our District Talk segment where we interview school district leaders to learn how they're keeping students safe on social media so those students can someday launch into their future by shining online. This episode was brought to you by our smartsocial.com VIP program. It's called the Very Informed Parent Program, which helps you engage your students with teen-led video lessons. Stay one step ahead with our premium parent newsletter and discover hidden features on trending apps on teens' phones and our 54 plus live parent and student-friendly events every single year. You can click on the link below to chat with one of our team members if you want a free pass to our VIP program to support your community with our smartsocial.com resources. And if you're a district leader who has a success story, we would love to feature you on a future episode. You can click the link below to reach out. Thanks so much for listening, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Have a great day.